Presentation, do you have it on there? Great. All right, hello everyone. Thanks very much for being here. It's really a thrill to see so many familiar faces here halfway around the world. I'm here to talk today about best practices for Live 360. Just a brief introduction to who I am before I jump into this. My name's Devon Copley. I'm the CEO of a new company called Imeve. We were previously part of the Nokia Ozo program, and we developed a large part of the software infrastructure behind the Ozo, including the Ozo Log. Actually acquired some of those assets from Nokia, and we're continuing to develop. So we have a great deal of experience with live. We did some of the very first and some of the biggest live presentations for VR 360. And when I say we build tools. We were supporting the work of production professionals and creative professionals on events such as the Champions League finals, the Coldplay show, Coachella, some of these largest multi-camera live 360 events that have happened to date. And in fact, I think just yesterday, the Champions League final was run using our software and about a dozen separate cameras. So we have some experience with this. We've certainly made plenty of mistakes. And my goal here is to sort of talk through some very practical ideas and thoughts about how you can make your own Live 360 presentations successful. So this is the overview of what we'll talk about. Capture, this is the pipeline, basically. Capture, production, delivery, and experience. And then I'll have a few words to say about what's coming next in the future. But first, just a quick note. Planning is always the most important step before success, especially for live productions. You don't get a second chance. They happen whether you're ready or not. And so it's very important to plan. I think it's worth at least mentioning that before we dig into the rest of the items. One point to call out, uplink bandwidth. I've seen many production fail because of uplink bandwidth not being available or not being tested. It's very common, in fact, if you go the day before the event, you try the bandwidth out, everything works great, and then suddenly everybody comes into the venue, they fill up the Wi-Fi, that overloads the local network, and you have trouble. So pay close attention to testing in advance. Okay, first, capture. How do you actually grab the imagery? And there's a number of aspects of this. The first one would be camera choice. You may not have a choice. You may have bought a camera, and that's your only camera. In some cases, when you have a client, you have a choice. You'll be able to spec the camera. And here, there is no one perfect solution. Depending on what you're trying to do and your budget and what your goals are, there may be several choices, or there may be only one option. This is my best understanding of where this stands, and I can't say this is gospel necessarily, because many of these cameras are continuing to be developed. But just to go through the kinds of things you should consider. First of all, are you doing 360 or 180? There's really only one camera I know of, which is Ozo, that will do either one on the fly. Are you doing 3D? There's quite a number of options now for 3D. Do you want to capture spatial audio from the device? This is surprisingly rare. Even the cameras like the Zcam S1 here that does capture audio, it's not capturing full spatial audio. It's got 4 microphones instead of a full spatial array. Do you want to record at the same time that you broadcast? This is the kind of thing that you might only encounter after you're starting your broadcast and you realize, oh crap, the Z1, for example, cannot record to its local SD cards at the same time that it's streaming. And so on. 60 frames a second is incredibly rare for live these days. It's actually quite a valuable feature. And I hope to see that supported on more devices. I'm going to move rather quickly through these slides because I just have half an hour, but please feel free to come up and chat afterwards if you have further questions. So aside from your camera decision, your camera position is the next most important thing. In fact, I'd say it's the single most important thing towards the success of your broadcast. And this is as much a matter of social engineering as it is of anything else. You have to get close to the people doing the production, and the bigger a production it is, the harder that's going to be. And you have to explain to them early what you're doing and why your camera location has to be different from all the other broadcast camera locations. People are used to putting broadcast cameras far away from the stage using big zoom lenses. That doesn't work with VR. And a good technique, something that has been successful for the teams we've worked with in the past, is actually bring a headset, bring a Go or something, and show them an A/B. Here's what it looks like if the camera's on the stage. Here's what it looks like if the camera is 50 yards away from the stage. And if you can just show them that, a lot of times you have people who haven't experienced 360 before. If you show them that, then they understand, and then they're willing to grant you the access you need. Now, you do have to be aware that you don't get too close, especially if you're doing stereoscopic capture. You know, usually you need to stay at least 1.5 meters away from your subject. I've seen, you know, people mounting cameras on the DJ stand or something like that where it's just too close and it makes for really weird stereoscopy. Camera mounting. I have a strong opinion about this. I think there's been a lot of don'ts that people have told everyone about 360. Don't do this, don't do that. And one of those is don't move the camera. I completely disagree with that particular piece of guidance. You do have to be careful with the horizon. If you move the horizon, you'll make everybody sick. But slow, gradual motion on a jib or on a boom, these are the kinds of things that actually make people feel more present because you get that motion parallax, which gives you the sense of depth, especially if you have a stereo capture. So we're big fans of camera mounts, of moving camera mounts. I've actually had the good fortune to be able to put one on a Skycam once, which is just glorious. Hopefully some of you will have the chance to do the same. But you have to be careful with vibration. Another sort of key, like, practical tip. Temporary stages, like you find at music festivals, are horrible for vibration. They're all mounted on these rickety things. You definitely want to put matting underneath it, rubber matting, and to secure it with sandbags to try to reduce the vibration that you get from being on the stage. Okay, and one more slide on capture. Thinking about image quality, and these are sort of going beyond the sort of standard things that you would normally think about for image quality. Lighting, if you have any control about lighting, think about how you manage that. You can turn off lights off stage, for example, like here right now. There's lights on in the backstage area. You can't see them, but I can. Sometimes the camera would be able to see them, and you can, especially when you've got, backstage cameras or things like that. You can manage the lighting to manage attention. Beware of exposure balance in direct sun. When you have a multi-camera rig or a multi-camera device like this one, you'll be loading the sensors differently if you've got sun on one side and sun not on the other side. The better software that's available will allow you to compensate for that on a per sensor basis, even further down the stream. Most cameras don't let you set, most integrated cameras don't let you set the exposure on a per lens basis, so you have to do it downstream. And then lighting flicker. This is always a problem with broadcast in general. One thing to be aware of, and I've seen this happen at sports events, you set up your cameras during the day, and then the production is actually at night. And at night, suddenly the lights come on, and you have to manage not just a different exposure setting, but also LED flicker. So flicker, you can often, you can play with your exposure settings. Sometimes you need to overexpose in order to eliminate the flicker. And again, if you've got decent image processing further down, you might be able to compensate for that afterwards. So those are just some tips on the capture side. Moving on to the production. So who's on the ground? What do they do? How do you manage that? Now, the roles for a 360 broadcast production shift from what you may have been accustomed to, or whether maybe some of the people on the team are accustomed to from standard broadcast. The main difference is around camera operation. In a standard broadcast production, you have a camera op who's co-located with the camera typically, if you don't have robot cameras like we have here, and is actually running the camera. In 360, that camera op is in the truck, and he's actually running your stitching software. So that depending on what software you're using, it may be a sort of set and forget, which has its pluses and minuses, very easy to use, but very limited control. Or it may be one like Imeve here, which lets you move your seams around and do convergence depth and all sorts of tweaks in order to make the stitch as good as it possibly can be. And an incredibly important role of the 360 camera op is panning. And I'll get to this in switching as well. But most software, not all, but most software will allow you to rotate the image at least along the pan axis and possibly along the tilt axis as well, so as to center the subject in the middle. This becomes a very important part of the stitching process, or switching process, sorry. So when you have a director who's calling shots from camera A to camera B, he wants to maintain the user's attention as they switch from camera A to camera B. And in order to do so, you want to pan camera B before you switch to it. This is a little difficult to explain. I should do a video. But essentially, you ask the camera op, and this is something I've sat in and watched directors do this. Camera op, camera B, 30 degrees right. And that will bring the object that you want to concentrate attention to the center of the screen before you do your switch. And that's like a basic technique of multi-camera 360 production that I think is not widely recognized. I talk about that there. Excuse me. Broadcast graphics. This is a major challenge at the moment. There are very few. I mean, I dare say there's no real broadcast graphics tools for 360. There is some ability to do comping, Voices, Imeve. These are systems that will allow you to comp in content and warp it to the sphere and potentially even locate it in 3D. But we're still quite a ways behind the sophistication of broadcast graphics systems with motion graphics that can move through space and these sorts of things. The fact is, those systems like VizRT haven't yet been integrated into 360 pipelines, as far as I'm aware anyway, and that's still sort of pending. So it can be quite painful to try to do the kinds of things that you may be used to with standard broadcast. Now, video switching, so moving down the pipeline here from your capture to the actual switching, a few points here. First of all, 4K is easy. 4K equipment is very easy to come by these days, and of course, we consider 4K to be the minimum level of competency or minimum level of resolution for a 360 production. But if you want to do dual 4K, 4K stereoscopic, that's considerably harder. I know of one workflow that works using the Blackmagic ATEM ME2, where you slave the effects bus to the main output. It's a little kludgy, but it works. There may be others, but I'm not aware of them. That's the only one I know of. And then trying to get beyond 4K is really an exercise in futility these days. I mean, our product, Imeve, supports a 6K output, and there are other products that do, but if you want to switch that output, then you're in a bit of a no man's land today. And there are some hacks and workarounds, but it's very, very difficult. That's something I expect to see change over the course of this year, both from us and from other vendors. But as of right now, it's quite difficult to do anything above 4K in a switched feed today. A few things to think about from an artistic perspective. As I mentioned, digital pan is, I think, the single most important technique in a multi-camera live production. Shot duration is something where I've worked with a number of different 360 directors, and they have widely varying opinions on this matter. So this is something that definitely is worth experimenting with. Do you just sit for a long time on a shot? Are you doing switches every 3 seconds? I think the rules are definitely different than they are in standard broadcast, but I don't think people have really found a sweet spot where people agree on the best duration. And this is an interesting thing. Play with masking. You can build masks using existing broadcast tools over the 360 sphere in such a way that you can mix together multiple 360 feeds to create new kinds of experiences. And just to give an example, I worked with Juan Santillan from Vantage TV at Coachella, and one of the shots he did that I thought was just so cool was that he took the 360 camera at the lip of the stage where that was showing mostly the band, and he masked off the bottom and brought in an audience camera, rotated it around so that the audience was below the stage looking at you, the viewer. Right, it was a strange but a really cool idea, and it was something that he came back to a few times. And that's just an example. I mean, I think once you think about how you can paint the sphere with feeds from multiple cameras, that's something that I haven't seen enough of, and I think that's there's all kinds of creative possibilities there. Audio. Audio is a huge problem for Live 360. The vast majority of Live 360 feeds you see today simply take a stereo feed and call it a day. That is dramatically, underselling the capabilities of the medium. It's making it less immersive an experience than it could be. But the tools to make it possible are rare. So there's basically 3 options depending on what you're going to do. You can, actually there should be 4. 0 would be just use camera audio, right? But that's always a bad idea. That's not a professional production if you're just using the microphone that's co-located with your camera. That can be a useful source of ambience, but that's not what you want for your audio production. So choice 1 would be you get your pre-mixed feed from a separate broadcast production, a stereo feed. You mux it in one way or another, either directly into your encoder or you mux it into your switcher. Either way, you mix it in. Now there, you have to worry about delay. You have no idea how much delay is going to be on that production depending on where you get that feed from. I saw a production recently where they were getting the audio feed. Actually, they couldn't get it from the broadcast. It was a sports event, so they got it off the FM radio. So FM radio has its own delay, right? So it's you have a good delay unit that can delay up to 2 seconds on the incoming audio. Second would be to create your own mix for the production. There you can actually ideally get stems from the broadcast production and do your own spatial mix. Now you might be able to do that to 5.1. Ideally you want to do it to ambisonic. I only know of one tool, and just a little plug for our product. Imeve Live can do a live ambisonic mix alongside your 360 video. I don't know of any other tool that can do that today. I know there will be more. I think it's a very important thing. I hope there will be more. And then you can even do, with our tool, a separate mix for each camera, so you can place audio sources in the correct location in the visual sphere for each camera in a multi-camera production. Now that takes a fair amount of work, excuse me, but it's worth it for certain kinds of productions. And the last point is always, always, always do a sync test. Don't guess at how much delay you're going to need. Don't imagine the delay is going to be right. You have to do a sync test. You have to budget time to do a sync test. You have to beg and plead if you're in the service of a broadcast audio production. Make sure you get that feed a couple hours before showtime so you can do your sync test. And don't take no for an answer. You can't, otherwise you won't be able to do it. Now, just one quick graphic just to talk about spatial audio mixing, how it can be, right? So this is what we have in Imeve Live, and you can see here we're ingesting multiple stems from an external broadcast mix, and we're placing those stems in space visually. So you can see up there, each one of those pluses is the location in the sphere of that audio feed, and then we mix that down to an ambisonic output for live. That's how it should work. That's how it works offline. And right now, this is this is something we feel strongly about because we put a lot of effort into it. Okay, 8 minutes left. Delivery. Moving on to what happens after it comes out of your production. Encoding and uplink. Here, you know, don't go under 4K for your uplink. Facebook and YouTube now support 4K ingest. I've heard that 4K by 4K stereoscopic is coming soon from one of the major, you know, broadcast providers. I hope that's true. For your uplink, try not to go under 20 megabits per second for 4K. It will get transcoded in the cloud, whatever service you're using, and you want to provide as much quality as you can before that transcode. If you are using moving cameras, like I mentioned, your encode, what's the word, efficiency will drop because moving cameras don't encode very well. So you probably want to up your uplink to a higher rate. Here's a little fact that you don't hear very often. People always talk about HEVC, H.265, being twice as effective as H.264. In my experience, that's more of an ambition than it is a reality. I think in recent offline encodes, that's starting to approach reality. For live encode, it's nowhere near it. We've tested the best, the most expensive encoders on the market at both H.264 and H.265, and in live, the difference is nominal. The H.265 compression algorithm requires a lot more, it has a lot more encode complexity that you can't do in real time. So as a result, don't worry about H.265, at least not this year, for your live encodes. H.264 is just fine. Now for audio, we still have limited support for live ambisonic uplink. Last I checked, YouTube still does not support live ambisonic. Only Facebook 360 and Samsung VR support it, as far as I know, and I'm very grateful to Facebook for actually pushing that through. Part of the problem here is that there's no standard. There's no standard for ambisonic transport via AAC over RTMP, which is sort of the standard uplink format. And presumably, whenever YouTube comes out with theirs, it will be different from Facebook's. And so we'll continue to be trapped in this sort of standards, nightmare for some time to come. Okay, a few thoughts about the user experience on the other end. Distribution targets. Obviously, there's Facebook and YouTube. I think when you're talking to your client, they may have, they probably have the same concerns or anyway, different needs they need to balance as they do with a standard broadcast. That Facebook and YouTube have their own branding and their own monetization around the streams. Some clients don't like that. If you have a client who doesn't like that, then your options are a little bit more complicated, right? So Little Star recently started supporting 4K Live across multiple platforms. I don't think it's on all of their platforms yet, but across multiple platforms. Samsung VR has supported 4K Live for some time, except only on Gear VR. And everybody else basically doesn't do it. Veer, Vimeo, Omnivert, Periscope, none of them support 4K 360 streaming today. But custom applications are an option. We've worked with a number of different Unity plugins. I'm a big fan of RenderHead's AV Pro. It's very stable, it's very performant, it works great at 4K over RTMP or HLS or MPEG-Dash. So if you're doing a custom development in Unity, I highly recommend that product. It's not that expensive either. And then a few words about monetization. This may be of interest. We're still in a world where the eyeballs don't monetize the content. That is to say, the eyeballs don't pay for the production. And we're going to be in that world for some time to come. There simply aren't enough viewers of 360, even for the most popular events, to underwrite the entire cost of producing those events. So while we're in that space, until the audience grows, and it is growing, there are other options. There's tech sponsorship, certainly. Google, Samsung, Intel have been putting plenty of money, Facebook as well, behind sponsorship of live streams. Brand sponsorship is starting to take off. Red Bull, Deutsche Telekom, AT&T. I think the telecom providers worldwide tend to be more interested in these kinds of sponsorships. They have very large marketing budgets, and these drive their public perception of them and their and consumption of bandwidth. So that's a good place to look for sponsorships. Content owners, they are still dipping a toe in. You see things like, a lot of people talk about, NextVR, for example, to take one example, has done terrific work from a production perspective. But don't be fooled. The NBA has not commissioned NextVR to create a 360 product for them. NextVR wrote them a check with a bunch of zeros on it from their investors' money. This is not yet a viable business for the sports companies on their own, or for any other content for that matter. Advertising has been limited. Again, without so much of an audience, advertising is not going to take off. And I think virtual ticketing, SVOD, that's very interesting to me. I think we will see that starting to happen over the course of this year and next year for high value, especially sports events. We've already seen, again, NextVR starting to experiment with monetization. I expect to see those kind of experiments happening around the world with a variety of distribution platforms. So I have 1 minute and 43 seconds. A few words about the future. Higher resolution. I think we all want to see higher resolution. There remain a number of challenges there. I think this year versus next year, we now have quite a few capture devices that can capture at 6K or 8K. The problem now, and we also have playback devices that have quite decent playback capabilities. The problem now is in the pipeline, in the production pipeline, where again we don't have 6K, 8K production switchers. We don't have decent RTMP ingest standards or over 4K. And viewport adaptive streaming, which is really going to be required, has not been implemented by anybody for live streaming yet. On the client side, we're never going to get mobile clients to play back 6K or 8K. I shouldn't say never. This generation, next generation of mobile clients are not going to play back 6K, 8K full frame. But viewport adaptive solutions, tile-based solutions, don't require the decode of the full frame. You can play back, in fact, we played back 6K video on an S7 by only using a portion, only displaying a portion of the frame, not decoding the full frame. So it is possible with the current generation of hardware. The pieces just all haven't come together yet. So that, again, I think we'll hope to see during the course of this year and next. Light field 6DoF, I mean, you heard a great introduction on that from Nathalie just a moment ago. These are not realistic in any near-term time frame for live. A lot of people have seen Intel's FreeD system. They don't call it FreeD anymore. That's the company they purchased that had this sort of director's path fly-through of a volumetric world. That's a beautiful vision. We will get there someday. But right now, that's a pre-computed path that can only process in just off real time using racks and racks of servers and vast amounts of processing horsepower. We're a long time from being able to do that in real time. But it doesn't break the laws of physics. That's where we will wind up eventually. You'll be able to stand at center court in the middle of the basketball game and watch it run through you. And I'm really looking forward to that. But there's a lot of problems to solve in the meantime. So a few notes in summary. Technically, Live 360 is very similar to live video. You can bring along the same people and train them up. It's really the 360 camera op. That's the key role. That is the most challenging role. The delivery and experience aspects, those need time to mature. It's not so much a hardware problem. We've got good enough sensor and playback hardware. It's a matter of the pipeline. And the market and audience are improving. We're seeing nice numbers, 30 to 50% year-over-year growth on the same kinds of events with the same sponsorship. That may not be the hockey stick that everybody was talking about 3 years ago, 2 years ago, but that's healthy growth, and it's good growth. And if you scale your businesses for that level of growth, then we'll all be successful. So that's it for me. I don't know if we have any time for questions.
Yes, we have time for a couple questions.
Thank you for your introducing. My question is about the moving the camera. Do you have more detail about the moving camera, and how do you look at the cram moving in the live feed? Thank you.
Yeah. That's a very good question. Okay, so jibs and booms are very cost-effective and cheap ways to move a camera. The problem is that the boom operator may not have, well, it's pretty difficult to give the boom operator a real-time preview. So he has to be in comms with the director, and the director has to guide him, and he has to have a good sense as to what will look good in 360. And that's pretty much the best you can do today. You know, it is possible to get him a feed with various means, but it will be pretty significantly delayed, at least by a couple seconds, if not more. So it's almost not worth it.
Any other questions? Sure.
The same way that location-based entertainment is developing, has anyone thought of doing a location-based live? Because like you buy your tickets, you go to this venue, it's not, you know, in New York where the concert is happening. You have your seat, you are with your friend, you have your drinks, and then you know, because the mobile is definitely like not you know, there in terms of performance, so that.
I love that idea. You know, I know of at least one startup that is pushing that kind of a concept. I mean, I've seen designs for like a sports bar with a 360 dome, right? Where the idea is you can, rather than watching the game on a little screen, you can actually immerse yourself in it with all your friends, right? I think that's a terrific. I think people underestimate the value of domes and those kinds of experiences. I know at Lollapalooza last year, they did a dome, and it was wildly successful. You know, the lines out the door, and people loved it. So I think those are good options.
Last question.
Yeah, regarding the dome projections, I have several friends who is doing the mobile domes, and it's quite expensive thing. So even if you rent it for one event, it can cost like $10,000 or $20,000. So it's going to be a very expensive bar with the drinks to cover this cost, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I visited a lot of domes, and the experience is very good. But my question was about how do you know maybe, or you, I don't know, face this problem, how to attract the people to watch 360 live?
Yeah.
Because it's a big problem. Not that many people have the headsets or prepared for that. And maybe there are some social networks or groups that love this, and you can just address them and they will join. Yeah.
I would recommend, there's one specific thing actually, which is the Facebook notifications capability. That's something that they've done a really good job of making sort of a part of their live ecosystem. There's nothing else really like it from YouTube at the moment, and I really like that. To me is a key tool that is available for you to use to drive people. You know, other than that, yeah, it's a challenge. I think you have sort of standard means of outreach to get people there.
Okay, that's it. Thank you, Devon, Copley from
Thanks,
Imeve.
everyone.
Thank you.
No, not yet. Before our next speaker, we have Wi-Fi now. So this is the password for today. It will probably change tomorrow, but we will provide it to you first thing. So sorry about the delay. So maybe take a photo of that, and then we'll move on.
Okay.